Well, Ahsoka episode 6 is out, and if it's taught me anything, it's that episode 5 was completely pointless. But the space whales! I hear you chiding in my comments section. Well, they could have simply put that into episode 4, and nothing of value would have been lost. The only purpose of episode 5 was to serve you up a big helping of member berries. And let me tell you folks, boy, did a lot of people eat those member berries up.
Yeah, I remember that.
So good. Hey, look, I get it. If you really love the show, I'm not trying to take that away from you. I really am not. I'm just giving you my opinion on it. And much like I feel that you are allowed to love it, I'm allowed to hate it. I don't like the show because I think it's bad. One of the biggest issues is that Dave Filoni literally doesn't explain what the hell is going on. Now, I've watched all of Clone Wars with the exception of the last season and all of Rebels, so I know what the World Between Worlds is. I know who Ahsoka is. I know who Space Admiral Elon is. But if I have not watched any of that stuff, as a viewer, I'm going to be mostly lost. The biggest issue that I think a lot of people didn't pick up on is the fact that Dave Filoni didn't explain anything in episode 5. The audience was left to fill in the gaps, and I got a lot of people coming into my comments giving their speculation on it, and that's the key thing. A lot of things were different from viewer to viewer, and that's intentionally done by Filoni because he didn't tell you what was going on and you basically filled in the gaps yourself. But somehow I'm the moron who simply didn't get it. I'm not saying I'm not retarded, I'm just saying I'm mostly not retarded. That's not good storytelling. I mean, sure, it works when you have the unreliable narrator trope, but that's not what we're getting here. This is something completely different. And personally, I think the use of member berries is to distract the audience to the fact that, well, nothing's actually being explained. And to all those who think that Dave Filoni was somehow being groomed by George Lucas himself to take over the property, you are wrong. As a matter of fact, George Lucas wanted it to die with him, and then he promptly changed his mind and sold it to Disney. Anyway, this is supposed to be a review of episode 6, not my continuous complaining about episode 5. So here we go. Let the shit show begin. In this episode, we finally get something that is relevant to the plot, which is finding Thrawn. They finally found Thrawn. At this point, they kind of have to, because if they didn't, even their diehard supporters would probably realize they're getting jerked around. Now, the episode opens up with Ahsoka in the whale, traveling through hyperspace where she's talking to David Tennant's droid. And let me tell you, a lot of the conversation is awfully meta.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Star Wars, referencing Star Wars. How quaint. Which goes back to the point that Star Wars isn't about anything anymore other than Star Wars, because it's Star Wars. Ahsoka also admits that Sabine willingly went with Baylan to the next galaxy, and to a certain extent, she blames her for not stopping them. We cut back to the Eye of Sauron, which arrives at the mysterious planet where the Witches of Dathomir are from. We have kind of a humorous interaction between Baylan and Sabine, which I find kind of funny because he comments to her about how he would thought that she would have used this time to reflect on things, and she's like, yeah, I just tried to avoid stuff like that. Fuck, hilarious. It's funny because you could basically use that to sum up all of Disney Star Wars. Lack of reflection on past mistakes. Oh, and get this, the name of the planet is Druidia. Spaceballs much? Does that make Morgan a Druish princess?
That's all we needed. A Druish princess.
In a very unnecessary long and drawn out scene, they take a shuttle and fly down to Druidia, where they see a bunch of giant statues of the Witches of Dathomir. And the Witches of Dathomir are doing Witches of Dathomir things, and Morgan rolls up and they're like, sup. And she's like, sup. Now you can say that culturally and ethnically, the Witches of Dathomir are supposed to be the same people. But these are two groups that have been removed by two separate galaxies, and they should not be able to speak the same language. The issue I'm having is not only are these two groups separated by not just two different galaxies and the void, but also time. And the longer two groups of people have been separated from each other, the more they're going to change over time. But yet, these are the very same Witches of Dathomir which we saw in the Clone Wars. And how everyone is speaking Galactic Basic is anybody's guess at this point. Now, I can kind of buy the fact that the reason why Morgan came to the planet is because of dreams and prophecy and space magic, but I can't buy into the fact that these cultures are basically remained exactly the same over thousands of years. But you know what? Not everybody has an anthropology degree. One of the witches looks at Sabine and says that it reeks of Jedi. I'm not sure why, because she's not force sensitive, and what, she can smell Ahsoka on her? Insert scissoring joke here. So they go and take her away and imprison her yet again. Now, one of the Night Sisters explicitly points out that it is dangerous, it being Sabine, and later on in the episode they let her go to go find Ezra, which actually makes no sense at all. If she truly is that dangerous, why let her go? Even if Baylan did promise this, you think that they would go, no, she's dangerous, we can't let her go find Ezra because bad things will happen. So the Night Sisters use their magic floating spaceballs to go and take her away to a cell. Next we get a scene between Baylan and his apprentice where he reminisces on the fall of the Jedi, and I have to say that despite the fact that he plays the character as being stoic, you can very much see the emotion in his face, and I have to give massive credit to Ray Stevenson for being such a phenomenal actor in the scene. And you truly do get insight into his character's motivation, saying that the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Empire is nothing more than a cycle, and that he's hoping that if the stories are true, that he can use Thrawn to break the cycle. And quite frankly, it just further illustrates the fact that Ray Stevenson really is one of the brighter spots of this awful series. Meanwhile, back in her cell, Sabine tries to use the Force to open the door, and at first you think that she might actually be using the Force, but it's actually the arrival of Thrawn's Star Destroyer. Now, this is the second fake out where we get Sabine trying to use the Force, and I have a feeling that probably in the final episode she's going to try and use the Force and something's actually going to happen. And this is probably where we get to the better part of the episode. We get the arrival of Thrawn's ship, and man, is it jacked up looking. It looks heavily damaged and it's covered in some sort of ritualistic paint, and quite frankly, this feels like something more out of Dune than it does Star Wars. The arrival of the ship is actually done very well, and it comes off as being imposing and intimidating, which is a rarity for the show. You also see Thrawn's stormtroopers that look completely jacked up. Their armor is dirty and cracked, and they're all chanting Thrawn very cult-like. And you can pretty much tell that something's not exactly right with all these... Well, hello, Cat. How are you? Thank you for interrupting. Okay, where was I? Something doesn't seem right about these stormtroopers. You have one that has like a gold mask on his helmet, and like I said, this is done really well, but it doesn't feel like Star Wars in the slightest. To me, it feels like another sci-fi property, like I said, with Dune. And again, we're running into a situation where Filoni's not exactly explaining what is going on with these stormtroopers, so I had to go to Bounding in the Comics and find out from there, because the episode does a piss poor job of explaining it. Now, it's a good possibility that they could explain it in a future episode, but I seriously doubt it. Now, according to Bounding in the Comics, these are supposed to be Death Troopers, which are just undead zombie-like stormtroopers. They first made an appearance in the Death Troopers novel that came out in 2009. And also in one of the episodes of Clone Wars, apparently one of the Night Sisters of Dathomir, old Daka, was able to go and raise an army of zombies herself. Now, how things got to this point is really anybody's guess, but quite frankly, I find this to be a far more fascinating story than the one we're currently getting. And then there's Thrawn, who just looks like a blue space Elon, gut and all. Could they have bothered to tell the actor, hey, can you maybe slim down a little bit to look more like the character? Because the character was actually pretty fit. And once the show begins to focus back on Sabine is where things stop being interesting. She has a confrontation with Thrawn. Thrawn is like, well, I guess I have you to thank for my rescue. And she's like, oh, I'm here for Ezra Bridger. And he's like, okay, we'll provide you some provisions and amounts, and you can go find them yourself. Which makes absolutely no sense. Literally in the next scene, they talk about going and killing Sabine, so why let her go? Thrawn, according to the novels, was supposed to be a genius tactician, and he is an alien who rose through the ranks of a very human-centric empire. Why he doesn't just outright kill her is beyond me, knowing that she is a threat and is going to work against him in the future. None of this makes any sense. And as I just mentioned, the fact that a few scenes later they mention killing Sabine just makes this really dumb. And remember folks, these are supposed to be the bad guys. The bad guys don't do nice things to people. They just go and murder them. But I guess we're getting more of the, well, you know, Star Wars really isn't about good and evil. It's just about sides and perspectives. Anyway, to sum up the rest of the episode, because quite frankly, it's kind of boring, Sabine goes off to go and find Ezra. But before she reaches Space Hobo Aladdin, she gets into another fight. And oh my god, I realized just how bad the fight choreography is with her. It's really bad. And I was thinking to myself, you couldn't have gotten a stunt double to do this because it legit is pathetic. There's actually a part in the scene where she gets hit in the back of the head by this bladed weapon and literally nothing happens to her. And when you go and actually watch the scene, she looks really uncoordinated with the lightsaber. Sabine is shot and thrown from her mount, and her mount goes and runs off. And the funny thing about it is that after the fight, she's literally chastising the animal for being a coward.
You abandoned me. Should have known you were a coward.
It's an animal. Horses run away in gunfights. Why would it be any different here? Anyway, this leads her to finding some rock turtle-like people. And due to some plot conveniences, they're able to figure out that, well, Ezra has been living with them, and this creature leads Sabine, and we finally get the reunion with Hobo Space Aladdin. By the way, shout out to Uber Geek for that one. Anyway, despite the fact that this episode does have some interesting things and it was superior, and I do use that term loosely, to the previous episode, which is quite frankly not difficult to do considering how low the bar is, this episode is still not that great. It's an improvement for sure, and I have to say at this point, episodes 6 and 4 are probably the best out of the series, but that's like saying, hey, I have AIDS, but at least I didn't die from it. Just because something is an improvement doesn't necessarily make it good. Now, another thing too, which I find rather interesting, is the fact that this show is called Ahsoka, but for some reason we seem to be spending a lot more time with Sabine. I'm guessing if they simply just called the show Sabine, nobody would show up to watch it. It would be like making a show called Kenobi and focusing completely on a different character. Oh wait, they did that one already. And here we are, 6 episodes into the series, and I feel like nothing has actually happened. And you could probably edit this down into 3 episodes, maybe 2, which makes me go to my original point that this is probably just another movie script that has been extended to 8 episodes with a bunch of filler. Now, ultimately, this is supposed to be leading into an actual movie that's going to be directed by Dave Filoni about Thrawn and Ahsoka. And the issue I have, like with other things that have been in Marvel, is the fact that you can completely skip the D+ series and just go see the movie because nothing of consequence is actually going to happen. The only thing that this does is it brings Thrawn back. And most people who are going to be your movie-going audience don't know or don't care about these shows. And so it's going to have nothing of consequence when it comes to the actual movie. So at the end of the day, this is just inconsequential content for a streaming service. Anyway, folks, that is my take. What is yours? Leave a comment and let me know what you think of this episode. While you're heading out, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Popping up right about here is my episode 5 review. Go and check it out. Let me tell you, people sure did love it. I say that sarcastically. I'll catch you next time, folks.